In this demonstration, I'm going to show you how to do importing from data that's been exported typically from a CAD file. And this arrow right here in the right-hand corner, I'll click Import, and that will open up this tab, which shows the ability to import parts and to import pipes. We'll get into pipe importing a little bit later. When I click on this, I see I have choices. Whatever you've licensed will show up here. I'm going to use Compress, which is a pressure vessel CAD system made by Codeware. This window here looks the same for all the different importers. And it allows you to select files and then set defaults and then choose what you want to import. And you get messages here as you're going through the process. So the first thing we're going to look at is importing this pressure vessel here, just the shell here, not the domes. So what I'll do is select it. And this is the XML output that was produced from Compress. I could view that or edit that with these buttons. I'm not going to do that right now. What this brings up, I'll go by outer diameter here, filter. This shows me that I have a 42-inch vessel. And then because Codeware gives so much data about the holes, you can derive these pipes that come off the shell and load those as well. So what we have here is the shell and then all the different possible pups that you might want to create. Down in this section we have default values. This allows you to set values that are not specified in the CAD import itself. So right now I have job A. You can see this is all green. If I made this job B, all that changes. I can also override that data if I wanted. I could say this is job C, and that one becomes fixed. So you can custom input data, or you can just use the defaults on this side. You may see some additional columns here that you don't see up here. For example, customer is not shown. That's just like all the other systems in PypeServer. I can go ahead and to column chooser, find customer, drag it up here, drop it in place. Now I can see it. So I could call this customer B as well. So that data will be imported when I run the import. Looking at additional default information, we have some cut defaults, stuff you really can't see in the importer, but still matters. One is feed rate. Some imports don't specify feed rate, others do. If they don't, you can specify it here, and that will apply to all the cuts that don't have that specified from the import. If it's blank, then the feed rate that applies to that cut in PypeServer. So if you set up your defaults in PypeServer for miters to be 30, then it'll get a feed rate of 30. If you've set up your holes to be 35, they'll get 35. Okay, so you don't have to specify it here to have it still specified. Same is true with bevel angle and root gap. Here you can set the number of tabs for all the holes. So if this is blank, then all the holes will get this number of tabs, if tabs are not specified in the import. If you leave it blank, they won't get tabs. So in this case, I only want tabs for holes that are greater than 20 inches. And that's just when you have large holes like this manway here. I want tabs so that it doesn't come clanking out and mess up the cut. So now that I have my default values set, I can check this if I want to schedule parts for these. I can also specify down here the number of scheduled parts that I want to be created if this is on. And so I've left that on. I'm going to create one scheduled part for each. If the CAD system actually specifies a quantity, of course, that will override these values. And now I just want to address how you pick the parts that you want to actually import. When I hit import, it'll offer me to pick the selected ones, or all, everything we see, or just cancel. I can also just filter down first before I even get to this. So let's say the 3-inch parts are all store-bought. There's some threaded piece. So I'm just going to select all of these and then turn that off. I just filtered those out. They're not going to appear in the import. It's not uncommon to want different settings for holes than, say, you would have for a shell. And so in this case, I'm going to pick all of these and then deselect my shell here because I want that to have different characteristics, and leave my root gap here at 0.125, and my bevel angle is 30, and then I want my feed rate on my holes to be 30. I can go ahead and hit import on this, just the selected ones, and it ran that. Gave me messages down here. If this doesn't work right, it'll come up as yellow with the warnings shown. And note now that there's just one item left that I haven't imported. So you can kind of pick away at your importing as you go. In this case, I don't want to have a root gap. I'll just set this to 0. And I want the feed rate, in this case, to be 40. And the bevel angle to be 37.5. So now I'll say import. And it imported that one. So let's go back and look at what we've imported. It's important to hit refresh to see your data. And now we can see we've imported all of this data. And here's the pressure vessel that we imported. And if I drag this over, you can see the similarities there. That angle right there. And here are some of the pup pieces that interface with the pressure vessel. Note also that all of these parts have a single scheduled part attached to them, so they are ready to actually go in production. That only applies, of course, in the enterprise version. So now I'll explain a little bit about re-importing. Let's say that you made this import and then somebody notified you of a change. To make it easier than just having to go find stuff in here and delete it, you have the ability to re-import the data. So I'll go back to compress. I'll go back to my file. Let's say this file now has been updated. And now you can see in yellow parts, they have an ID. And that means that they've already been imported. These weren't imported, they were the small diameter items, so we'll just turn those off again. So now I can re-import these after making the changes. It'll only let you do this if the scheduled parts are not nested. If they are nested, this will come up red and you will not be able to import onto it. That's because the changes may involve changing pipe diameter or other factors which would ruin the logic of it being on a pipe of a certain size. The CAD import ID is derived from IDs or unique information that we can get out of the import data. In this system, we have a CAD import ID that came in with the shell, and then each pup that we've derived has its own ID, which is based on the nozzle ID in that CAD system. So we just combine the two together to make a unique ID for it. And we create a parent CAD ID here so we know what it's referring to. This is just a local column here for use during the import. Now let's say that we really don't want to import over this part. I'm importing this again. We don't really use these IDs as strictly as the system allows, so I can turn that off and say CAD import ID rules are now off. This column becomes editable, and I could just say this one would be version 2. And here you can see we have two 42-inch shells that are identical. But one of them is now has the CAD ID of version 2. Okay, now I'm going to show you the import of two cylinders that are end-to-end, and one cylinder starts at 120 and finishes at 240. So everything's offset. You can go ahead and use those dimensions and cut that on the machine when you nest, or even when you don't nest. The machine will handle those offsets just fine. You don't have to change that data. But if there's a reason you want to, just for ease of reference, you can go ahead and do that using this zero part feature. So I've already imported that file right here, and I can pick on my two shells. You can see they're very large shells. And if I have zero part checked, they'll both come in relative the leftmost cut at 0. In this case, I'm going to leave it off just to show you one other way to deal with this. That would just solve it right then and there. But now I'm just going to go ahead and import the selected. I hit refresh, and now I've got my two pieces in here. Here you can see this one starts at 0 and goes to 120. And this one starts at 120 and goes to 240. Again, the machine will cut this just fine, but if for some reason you want to refer to 0, go ahead and hit Edit Design, and you can just shift the part to 0 right here by clicking on this. And here it says Shift to 0. I'm going to shift it over by 120. Now everything's zeroed. If I wanted to shift it back, I could just shift it back using the same feature. I'll go ahead and do an import from Acorn. Here I've got over to the Acorn directory here. I'm going to import these three files. And you can see from these 3 files I get all of this data. So everything looks the same. The system works the same. You get messages coming down in here. I'll just go ahead and go. And now you can see I have Acorn imports. To import pipes, here you can pick a new Excel template. You do need Excel for this. And it opens up this window here and has all the fields that you need. And typically, if you had a list, you could cut and paste your columns or reorder your columns so that you can just paste them all into this. Okay, so I've filled out my data. In this case, this 6-inch pipe doesn't have a customer or job. We're just using it as we go. And this piece that we brought in was custom just for this job. So I just go ahead and save this. Then I can just go back in and pick this file here. So I just go ahead and pick that, and it shows me the data in Excel. And I can go ahead and import these pipes. And here we can see all the different pipes that I just imported. These can be used in nesting.